To eulogize means to speak well of. And I wonder what Charlie Kirk would say about Charlie Kirk. Because his death stood in stark contrast to the way he lived and the things he believed and the things he espoused. He often talked about black criminality. He often talked about the high crime rates among black people. He spent his life saying that black people basically were inferior and they were superior. Apparently, he's never met a qualified black person that didn't earn it through merit. They were all set aside in DEI.
If someone finally shut Charlie up, America would breathe easier. Those weren't just words whispered in a leaked video. They were the spark of a national firestorm, a murder, a comedian's mockery, a country torn apart, and the question still haunting millions: did D.L. Hughley laugh his career into the grave? The auditorium at Utah Valley University pulsed with restless energy. Students filled every seat. Cameras streamed to millions online. Charlie Kirk walked onto the stage, smiling, ready to clash with critics. But within minutes, the smile was gone forever. A deafening crack split the room. Kirk stumbled, clutching his neck, blood spilling across his white shirt. Screams swallowed the hall. Phones dropped but kept recording, capturing the unthinkable: the murder of a man live, in front of a nation already fractured. Within hours. Hashtag scream Charlie Kirk assassinated. The internet drowned in shock, rage, and disbelief. But before grief could even settle, another storm erupted. D.L. Hughley, the outspoken comedian, posted a chilling message: the power of life and death is in the tongue. He didn't cry. He didn't console. He mocked. For some, it was a comedian's brutal honesty. For others, it was cruelty of the darkest kind. And as the funeral loomed, so did whispers that Hughley's words might have gone further than comedy, that his tongue may have played a role in bloodshed. To understand why Hughley's post detonated like a bomb, you need the BACKSTOY. Charlie Kirk was no stranger to controversy. His speeches drew cheers from conservatives and fury from liberals. He spoke of gun rights with still conviction, once declaring, "Some deaths are worth the cost of freedom." Those words would later return as his blood stained the stage floor. Meanwhile, D.L. Hughley's career was thriving: comedy specials, political commentary, a brand built on sharp wit and sharper criticism. But his humor often cut deep, especially toward conservatives like Kirk. To his fans, he was a truth teller. To his critics, a venomous agitator. When Kirk was murdered, Hughley's reaction was instant and devastating. He reposted Kirk's old clips, framing them as irony of fate. Then came the leaked audio, a voice, eerily like Hughley's, laughing. "Charlie's death gave me more followers than his speeches ever did." The backlash was swift. Sponsors vanished. Clubs canceled shows. Protesters lined streets outside his gigs, calling him a monster. And darker still, whispers of an FBI probe began circulating. Were his words just jokes or dangerous fuel for a murderer? The decline had begun, and what followed was a spiral so explosive it would leave Hughley's career and America's card forever. As the nation tore itself apart, Hughley's family was dragged into the storm. His daughter, once quietly proud of her father's bold voice, received death threats. One message read, "Your father's blood will pay for Charlie's blood." Terrified, she posted the threat online, only to delete it hours later. Sobbing under waves of harassment, his wife was forced to shut down her accounts entirely. The hate was relentless, calling her complicit, branding the family as villains. Security patrols circled their home. The laughter of a comedian's household was replaced by whispers, locked doors, and fear. Friends urged Hughley to apologize, to retreat, to protect his family, but he refused. On a podcast, his voice trembled. Charlie built his career spitting on graves. "I won't be silent because it's his this time." Supporters hailed him as fearless. Critics painted him as heartless. But behind the bold words, Hughley admitted in one interview, eyes glassy, "I didn't know they'd want me dead too." The man who once made millions laugh now made millions rage. And as the world debated free speech versus cruelty, one truth remained: Hughley's family bore the heaviest burden. They weren't comedians. They weren't politicians. They were collateral in a war of words turned deadly. The funeral of Charlie Kirk was supposed to be sacred. Instead, it became a battlefield, Mourners arrived in silence, clutching flags, wearing "Justice for Charlie" pins. But outside, protesters screamed, "Cancel D.L. Hughley." Signs branded him a murderer with words. Police stood between two furious crowds, supporters grieving Kirk, and activists defending Hughley's right to speak. Inside, Kirk's sister's voice broke the silence. "Stop laughing. My brother was murdered, and you mock him still." Her sobs cut through the noise, leaving even cameras trembling. Meanwhile, Hughley's own final farewell to the scandal came in another viral live stream. His face was pale, his voice raw. "Charlie Kirk's blood is not on my hands, but the blood of the families he mocked, that's real. Cancel me, jail me, but you will never silence me." 30 million people watched. Some cried with him, others cursed his name. It wasn't just a goodbye to Kirk, it was a goodbye to Hughley's career, his public trust, and perhaps the last sliver of unity left in America. Charlie Kirk's murder was tragedy, but what followed, the chaos, the laughter, the venom, was catastrophe. D.L. Hughley's words became a symbol, debated endlessly. Was he a comedian holding a mirror to hypocrisy, or a cruel man mocking death? The verdict didn't matter. His career collapsed, his legacy forever stained. But in the ashes, a larger truth remained. America was no longer mourning together. It was tearing itself apart. Families stopped speaking at dinner. Protesters clashed in the streets. Hashtags replaced humanity. Kirk's death became less about the man he was, and more about how a divided nation weaponized grief. And Hughley, he became the face of the question haunting every American home. When does free speech stop being free and start becoming fire? History won't remember this saga as just a comedian mocking a political figure. It will remember it as the moment America's fragile soul cracked wider than ever before. Because words don't just sting. Words can wound. Words can kill. And if the power of life and death truly is in the tongue, then America's mouth is dripping in blood. The cameras may have stopped rolling inside the courtroom. The verdict may have been delivered. But for millions of Americans, the story wasn't over. In fact, the story of D.L. Hughley and Charlie Kirk had only just begun, because while the trial, the protests, and the cancellations filled the headlines, what lingered most wasn't the events themselves. It was the aftershock, the ripple effect that spread through families, communities, and a nation already trembling at the edge of collapse. When the jury's decision was finally read, gasps echoed across the world. Some cheered, believing justice had been served. Others wept, convinced free speech had been buried. The courtroom was divided. The streets outside were on fire. And yet, in living rooms across America, silence filled the air. Families who had once gathered to watch comedy shows, political debates, or even Kirk's speeches now stared blankly at their screens. Not because they didn't care, but because they didn't know what to believe anymore. D.L. Hughley had once been a man who made people laugh. Charlie Kirk had once been a man who made people argue. But now, their names were no longer about comedy or politics. They were symbols. Symbols of a nation so broken, so fractured, that even death and grief became battlegrounds. Charlie Kirk's funeral continued to haunt the public. The image of his sister sobbing, begging the nation to stop mocking her brother, were played endlessly online. Her words weren't political, they weren't partisan, they were human. "My brother was murdered in cold blood, and now people laugh. Is this who we are?" That raw plea cut deeper than any headline or hashtag. For some, it sparked reflection. For others, it hardened their rage. But for all, it left a question that wouldn't fade. Had America lost its soul? Meanwhile, Hughley's live stream, the one where he declared, "Cancel me, jail me, but you will never silence me," became just as iconic. His face, trembling with fury and defiance, was burned into memory. Two funerals took place that week, one for Kirk's body and one for Hughley's career, and both left scars that would not heal. The weeks that followed saw America pulled tighter into two opposing camps. On one side stood Kirk's defenders. They raised his death like a banner, proof that violent rhetoric from the left had gone too far. They branded Hughley a villain, a man who had crossed from humor into cruelty. Conservative media replayed his leaked audios on a loop, turning them into evidence of his alleged guilt. On the other side stood Hughley's supporters. They called him a truth teller, a man punished not for cruelty, but for refusing to sanitize the truth. They argued that Kirk had mocked death for years, that his own words had left wounds on marginalized communities. To them, Hughley's downfall wasn't just a sit, it was censorship. To America's, to truths, and no bridge between them. Behind the headlines, Hughley's private world unraveled. His wife and children lived under constant surveillance, their homes surrounded by angry protesters one night and loyal defenders the next. His daughter admitted in an interview, "We don't laugh in this house anymore. We just survive." Hughley, once a fixture on late-night shows and comedy tour, found himself exiled. Contracts were shredded, sponsors fled, comedy clubs closed their doors, fearing riots if he took the stage. And yet, he kept speaking, he kept streaming. His voice grew hoarser, his words sharper. But the more he spoke, the more the divide deepened. For every supporter who saw him as a martyr, a dozen critics branded him heartless. In the court of public opinion, his sentence was harsher than anything the law could deliver. Permanent exile from the world he once ruled. But the true legacy of this tragedy wasn't Kirk's death or Hughley's downfall. It was the terrifying question that lingered in its shadow. When does free speech become a weapon? America has always prided itself on freedom of expression, the right to speak, to joke, to criticize, even to offend. But after Kirk's murder and Hughley's mocking words, that right no longer felt simple. Could a sentence inspire violence? Could a joke ignite murder? Could words carry blood? The FBI inquiry into Hughley's comments didn't end with a conviction, but it didn't need to. The damage was done. Millions now believed his words had fueled a killer. Millions more believed silencing him was the greater crime. And so, the nation was left with no resolution, no peace, only questions. As months passed, Charlie Kirk's image transformed. For some, he became a martyr, a man who died for his beliefs. His speeches, once controversial, were now played at rallies with a reverence that bordered on sainthood. For others, he remained a polarizing figure, remembered not just for his death but for the pain his words had inflicted during his life. But one thing was undeniable: his name would never fade. Charlie Kirk had been silenced in an instant, but his memory was louder than ever. D.L. Hughley's unwanted legacidal Hughley, too, would never fade. But his legacy was one of fire and ashes. In comedy history, he would no longer be remembered first as the sharp-witted entertainer, the king of biting satire. Instead, his name was tied forever to Kirk's murder, to leaked audios, to the image of a man laughing while a nation grieved. And yet, even in disgrace, he became something larger, a warning, a lesson, a symbol of the razor-thin line between freedom and cruelty, between humor and harm. As Americans reflected on the saga, many realized the tragedy wasn't just about Kirk or Hughley. It was about themselves. Because in the end, the real collapse wasn't of one career or one political figure. It was of a society that had turned death into entertainment, that had turned grief into hashtags, that had turned human pain into culture war fodder. Families were divided, churches split, protests erupted, dinner tables grew silent, and all because of one question: what do words mean anymore? If words hold the power of life and death, then what do our words say about us? The saga of Kirk and Hughley revealed something chilling. America wasn't just watching a tragedy. America was becoming one. Because when laughter turns to cruelty, when speech turns to fire, when funerals turn to battlefields, what's left of humanity? Perhaps Hughley wasn't just mocking Kirk. Perhaps he was holding up a mirror so brutal, so raw, that no one wanted to see their reflection. In the ashes of scandal, in the silence after the verdict, one truth remained undeniable. No verdict could bring Charlie Kirk back. No cancellation could heal the wounds. No speech, no joke, no protest could undo the blood already spilled. But maybe, just maybe, this tragedy could serve as a warning, a reminder that words are not harmless, that speech is not free, it comes at a cost. Because when the cheering stops, when the hashtags fade, and when the laughter dies, what we're left with is simple: human lives. And human lives are fragile, precious, irreplaceable. So, the next time we speak, the next time we post, the next time we laugh at another's pain, we must ask ourselves, are we breathing life into the world? Or are we spilling more blood with our tongues? Because in the end, the legacy of D.L. Hughley and Charlie Kirk isn't just theirs, it's ours. And the question history will ask is not, what did Hughley say? Or what did Kirk believe? It will ask, what did America become when faced with their deaths? And the answer, whether we like it or not, is written not in courtrooms or comedy clubs, but in us.